Take that, I'm going to hand over to Mayor Burney.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. Can we just start our day with our normal karakia, please? Whakataka hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kia kiuta, ki mā tautara te tai, he aki ana, te atakura, e tio, e hoka, e hauhu, ti hei Māori ora. Welcome everybody, it's nice to be with you today. I just want to, before I hand to Sam, who's going to pretty much run this Statement of Expectations session today, introduce to you, if you haven't met already, the chair of the Shareholding Committee, Chris Levin. Chris is our independent chair, so he is not a representative of any council, so it's actually really good that the three councils can work together without having that parochial chairmanship, if you like. Can I also introduce Mayor Andy Watson, from Rangitikei. Andy is the Vice Chair of the Shareholding Committee, so great to have you here, Andy. Thanks for coming. Great to have the audience, especially Te Tūmata Kāhoki and the representatives of Tapawaiaho here in the room. It's great that you are joining us. And with that, I'm going to ask Sam to take over. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Burney, and just acknowledging Chris Galvin, who's our independent chair of the Shareholders Committee. He has been doing a huge amount of work in the background to support us around the Statement of Expectations. I am a little bit worried that people might think that this session is going to be a bit more exciting than it probably is, but where we're at, just to give you an overview of where we're at. So, as the Shareholders Committee, we have had a workshop up in Palmerston North to provide initial feedback on an initial working draft of the Statement of Expectations. And then about 2 weeks ago, the Shareholders Committee had a further meeting to consider a updated draft of the Statement of Expectations, which reflected some of that early feedback and some of the early views expressed during the workshop that was facilitated by Chris. And so where we find ourselves is in your pre-reading, you will see this memorandum that's on the screen along with the draft Statement of Expectations. And at the last Shareholders Committee meeting, there was basically a part of the meeting was around where are we sitting in relation to this draft? How are we feeling? What's the sentiment? And I think that it's fair to say that there was broad consensus at the last workshop that the draft, as it's in your readings, is looking pretty good, and it had appropriately reflected the feedback and the views that had been expressed up to that point. And so what we're going to do is, I guess, use today as the opportunity to get your feedback, thoughts, views on the draft that's in your pre-readings. But I do need to acknowledge that we are the fourth cab off the rank. So the two other councils and Tapawaiaho have already had this type of workshop, and so they have had a look at the Statement of Expectations, and there is a range of feedback that has come forward in relation to that. We are not going to discuss that feedback today. This is our opportunity to react to the draft that is on the table, and it's just because I think what needs to happen is that we need to get all the feedback from all the different parties to this back into the melting pot. There'll need to be some further discussion, but our focus today, so in terms of the document you have in front of you, is the first column of the table that's on the A3 sheet in front of you, and you will see that wording is exactly the same as in the draft that was in the pre-reading packet. The last couple of things I just want to cover off, I'm just going to pull up this email, is as I said, at the last shareholders committee meeting, there was, I guess, I think, really positive support for the direction of travel of the statement of expectations. There weren't any significant red flags raised. I don't think there were even any areas where there was significant divergence of view. There were a couple of areas where people did seek for some additional small changes or tweaks, and I'll just profile those now. And they might sound a little bit abstract unless you really have gone through the document and understand kind of the elements of it. But raised at the last workshop were some areas of discussion or greater specificity needed were around the period of operation of 1 year, or a formal directive for a review of the SOE after 1 year. And that was because the draft basically talked about the statement of expectations being reviewed after a period of 3 years. And so the shareholders committee, I think there was pretty much a uniform view that because so much is happening, we're in this establishment and transition phase, that we really wanted to revisit and re-look at the statement of expectations within that kind of 12-month period. So just before or after standing up of the organisation. Bernie, Chris, Dan, did you guys want to speak to anything on that? No? Excellent. The second point that was discussed at the shareholders committee meeting was about the customer charter. So this is essentially the discussion was that there was a desire for there to be, I guess, more of a directive clause in the statement of expectation around the need for a customer charter and what it should contain, essentially. Any comments on that one?
There's actually a legislative requirement for the Central District's water, for all water boards to have a customer charter. So the question came down as to whether it was open-ended from us within the SOE that they came back with a draft customer charter, or whether we actually prescribed through direction what the components of that charter ought to be. You may remember, for those of you who have gone over it with an eagle eye, that the first edition had actually a directive as to these will be the components of the customer charter. For this version 2, the one you've got in front of you now, it was more empowering of the board to come back for our consideration with the customer charter, and that was raised and I think spoken particularly by PNCC, that they would like to go back to more of the wording under the first, which of course is not a problem. But the fact of there being a customer charter, there absolutely has to be. We've got no discretion on that.
And I'll keep going through the points in a second, but Chris has raised a good point, which is just to remind me to make you aware that the shareholding, the statement of expectations is a good sort of mix of, you'll find some clauses that are quite enabling and empowering of the board, say we want you to go away and do some work and present it back to us for endorsement or adoption or feedback, versus some other clauses that are quite directive and it says you will do this and you'll do it this way. And that really reflected the views that were shared at our initial workshop with you all, where we did want to essentially signpost to a number of things, send the board away to do some work, but there were some specific areas where we needed to be more directive or a bit more tight around what we were expecting of them. Back to the some of the other points that were raised during the meeting with the shareholders committee was that there was a request to work on refining some of the relationship provisions, and there was a desire to revert back to some of the formal wording in the initial draft. Instead of referencing, for example, maintain regular contact with, it was back to strong and trusting relationships. I think that's quite minor in terms of a wording change. Another point was around how reporting by the board will be circulated, so it's quite a mechanical piece. There was a refinement of reference to funding, not limiting it to the LGFA funding source. Again, it's kind of an important but small, non-controversial point. there was a desire for there to be clear mention of harmonisation, and that was about bringing over some of that wording and more than just signposting, but actually bringing over some of the wording from the shareholders agreement on the limitations around that. And also, you will recall that the water services plan, that was submitted to DIA early on in this process, set out some of the approach and thinking around price harmonisation and funding.
Oh yeah, John and Chris. It's also in the shareholders agreement. So the question there was whether the SOE ought to just, in effect, doff the cap to the fact that harmonisation has been resolved by the councils. It's no intention to change it in the SOE. It's just to the extent that the SOE references the plans about harmonisation. You remember that there's 5 years that the board has to make a plan for after 5 years for there to be harmonisation across the areas, the service areas, notwithstanding the fact that, for example, Rangitikei, there's an issue of harmonisation within that area. But that's all covered. Outside of the SOE, and the question here was to what extent should that be referred to more expressly within the SOE. If it is, it will be just borrowing the language from elsewhere. We're not rehashing or relitigating that. It's just merely referencing it more clearly in the SOE.
Next on the list here was about the local statements, and you'll recall from our workshop that we talked about that, and in some ways we were, I think Chris has described it as some shadow boxing, where we'd heard from our partner councils that there was an interest in kind of headlining some things and that some local elements in the statement of expectations. So we were proactive in putting forward our ideas for a local statement. I think there is consensus around all partners, including the Tapuaiaho, around the need for a local statement to be in there. But the discussion at the last shareholder meeting was around trying to refine those and be a bit more consistent. And there was some language that was under individual council statements that actually apply to all councils. And so just working out what we apply across all, what we ingrain or embed as applicable generally versus the specific stuff that relates to each of the councils. So there's been some really good work done by Katie Isabellin, councillor from PNCC, to have a bit of a play with that, and so we'll show that not today, but at some point once we've had that all go back into the pot to the shareholders committee.
Can I just ask a question?
Sure.
Is that why, just looking at the last column in terms of, I see that we've just got a small document references, and then we have Rangitikei and Palmerston North with quite extensive wording in here in terms of what their priorities are. Is that what you're relating to at the moment? And
yes.
And it will change so we can also have a bit more of a...
So it's fair to say that in the working draft, so what's in your pre-reading, Horowhenua has, I think, 3 paragraphs and has a lot more words than the others. And so I think the discussion was how could we refine that down, but also it's obviously through this process, there's feedback coming from other councils around what they want to see in there. And so for today, we're not going to talk about that, but in terms of everyone's just understanding kind of what's the right size fit for the statement of expectations.
The wording there is a bit clunky because not all councils even provided anything. And in fact, from the submission, I had to draw something together because you guys had lent into it really, really positively. And I'll be honest and say I put quite a bit of heat on the committee and said, do we really need these? Are these really things that are specific to local, or are they something that is just a reiteration of what is in the general form of the SOE? And if you still believe you need something that is locally derived, then let's have some uniformity as to what that might look like. PNCC, God bless them, said, we've got a few projects that are really important. I said, well, you didn't put that in your statement, so that would be somewhere that you might consider what your statement would look like. If we can get a little bit more harmony as to what those statements look like for the three councils plus Ngā Tapuā, I think that would be good. Yeah, because the consensus seems that it's important to have something in there. I just don't want it to be a reiteration of the points that are already made in the SOE. It has to be something that's genuinely about what is unique and what is important that the board needs to know about the local context.
And so we have taken the view and the feedback from this table that it is important to our council, for example, to headline things like the Lake Accord and the Manawatu River Accord, because they're not specifically capital programs or lines in a long-term plan. They're not. They need to be front and centre in terms of things that we think are important in terms of headlining. So that's why they are captured there. Yep, sure.
Sorry, just one more point. we can take some comfort the fact that these can be relatively narrow and focused. Why? Because parallel to this, there's a huge amount of work going on with the transfer agreements. The transfer agreements not only cover personnel and plant, but they also cover all of the obligations that each of the three councils have. The contractual obligations that are novated across, and those documents will likely fill a small bus. And they also are before the board, and the board needs to have their head around and over those transfer agreements to understand what their obligations are and what their commitments and their contractual commitments, but also what kind of plant and materials and assets and debt and income that they're working with. The SOE is sort of, in a sense, refers to that in existence, and it sits alongside the SOE, but we don't want to repeat it all in the SOE, otherwise we have a completely unwieldy document.
Chris, I'm going to just get you to talk to this last point. One of the points that came up at the shareholders meeting was Deputy Mayor Wilson's comment about demonstrable provisions, particularly in aspects of relationship building, that can be brought through into the reporting provisions. Can you just remind me what that one was about? That was Deputy Mayor Dave. Yeah. I might have to circle back on that. Yeah. And the last thing that to discuss was that at the shareholders meeting, there was discussion of where both Rangitikei and PNCC had both raised the point around the local flavour and the local responsiveness and the local presence of Central District's water, and for some reason we hadn't been explicit about that, but Mayor Burney and I said that's absolutely something that we support being strong in the statement of expectations. So just to close that off. So,
Didn't we cover affordability?
No, we haven't covered affordability.
Can I give it
Have a go.
One of the components was about affordability. You'll see affordability is referred to. You spoke about it a lot at your last workshop, and in fact, so did Ngā Tapuā Hau, and so did the other councils. Incredibly important. In fact, it's somewhere near the top of the directive expectations that we have on the company, and there's affordability is mentioned a few places. There was some discussion about how we should probably have some more wording about direction as to what affordability means, but that will be very much the same as harmonisation. The SOE will not be reinventing the wheel on affordability, because you've already agreed to what affordability means in the context of both the shareholders agreement but also the water services development plan. And so there is an equation that is being devised as to what affordability means. Top of my head, I can't remember the exact figures, but it's something like over a 5 to 10 year period that the inflation and extra costs will not go above a certain percentage, so you can work back as to what that might look like year on year on year. Affordability is a word that we all bandy around quite a bit, but actually the devil's in the detail, or as Honda Vasa said, the God is in the detail, and that is not for us to be re-articulating and reinventing for the SOE. So the question as to why that was raised last time was whether the SOE just needs to be a bit more express about affordability, but if we think that that's a yes and we agree with that, that'll just be bringing wording what's already agreed, as opposed to us having to reinvent what affordability means to us.
Thanks, Chris. And I think just building on that, that is an important point for us to reflect on as a table, is that we have submitted a water services delivery plan to DIA a long time ago, which set out our intended approach to our water's delivery, and it covered, as Chris said, things like affordability and harmonisation, all that kind of stuff, and what our customers and our community can expect in terms of pricing and cost. And so it's really important that we are grounded in that as well, because the more expansive and the more things we expect of Central District's water, the higher the potential is to get away from what we've already indicated and signalled to our community, because the more things that we ask CDW to do, the more cost, and therefore the more cost that then transfers to the end consumer. So I think it's something we've all just got to be really mindful of. I've given you the kind of, sorry if that's a bit of a whirlwind in terms of where we're at right now. And so we sit here today with a draft in front of us, acknowledging that there are also 2 lots of substantive feedback from other partners that will need to be discussed and dealt with by the shareholder committee. But today is your opportunity to reflect on the draft and tell me and Bernie and Dan and the others in the room if there are particular elements in this document that you are concerned about, whether if you want to simply signal that you support it, you really like the direction of travel, if there's anything you want clarified. And so there's 2 ways we can do this. We can either just have an open session, you can give me your feedback, or we could go through sort of page by page, which would be grouping sort of 5 clauses at a time. Prefer not to do that, but if there is a desire to do that, we could do that. I think the better approach might just be to get your high-level reflections and views first, and then deal with any specific items. Before we do that, I'm going to hand over to Bernie to see if there's any reflections you wanted to convey after the last Shareholders Committee meeting.
Not really. I think substantially we're on the pretty much the same track, and that we're reasonably well aligned. We're talking about minor things in a lot of detail at the moment, and but overall, I think we pretty much agreed that the structure for the statement of expectation needs to be as compact and as efficient as possible, that it does not need to be too detailed. That will come out in that water services strategy that is going to be developed as well. But this is still an important document that is the go-between between what councils and the board and our community need to understand where we have got the relationship right and the expectations right. So, trying to find that right balance is key. But I think there is some really good stuff in here, and the work that Sam, Katie, and others have done demonstrates that we're thinking pretty much along the same lines. It's just how we put that together.
Thanks, Bernie. I think the one thing I just will also mention is that this table did also communicate the importance of visibility of the MOU that is being worked on with Ngā Tapai Aho, and the extent to which that will be signposted or connected into the SOE, and whether what's dealt with in the MOU versus what might need to be dealt with in the SOE. I don't have a clear update for you in terms of where things are at with the MOU, but I don't know, Dan, do you know, or Chris, do you know what the status of the MOU is?
Not yet been agreed. It's still working its way through the negotiation process.
Still being drafted. Okay. So I know that there was quite a strong signal that you wanted to have some visibility of that before we could progress that. So with that caveat in mind, I think we need to just progress through the document as it is, and then once we've got that document, we'll have to come back. Did you
that was just my question, because we had put quite a bit of emphasis on having that MOU, and was there a date? Because I felt feels like there's a series of documents, but it'd be good to see them, how they all work together. So, yeah.
As I say, I don't have a particular answer for you. I'm sorry on dates or when we can expect. I have been harassing Monique, and now I'll be harassing Dan a bit. So all I can undertake to do is that we will provide an update as soon as we can on that.
Yeah, just to reiterate the process for today, hearing the message that visibility side by side SOE MOU would be helpful just to build that context of understanding the interdependencies. But really today the focus is around the pre-reading and any feedback, and if there isn't feedback, that's also a positive thing, because that then allows our shareholding committee representatives to get back around the table with all parties and reach agreement on their remaining feedback. So it is just that opportunity today to provide feedback, what we call column 1, or that base SOE, and so that we can provide that mandate to our shareholding representatives to get it back around the table and resolve feedback from the 2 other councils and Ngā Tapu Waiahou, which will ultimately come back to this table for visibility, and there's a potential that we may be able to share more insight on the MOU at this point as well. So it's not the last iteration, but it is helpful to get that understanding and mandate from council to complete this process with the shareholding committee.
And just to be clear, it's about taking the time to get, in terms of the MOU, it's about taking the time to get it right. We're all on the same page with it.
I understand. Yeah, I think the lawyers are in the initial stages of still drafting the structure, because we haven't had particular input into it at this stage. But as soon as a draft comes forward, no doubt we'll circulate and there'll be some discussion if needed. Katrina? Katrina, we'll let Chris go first and I'll come back to you.
The MOU is a foundational document, so it doesn't actually involve the committee at all. So that's why I was relatively not dismissive but a little vague. It's not because I'm trying to hold cards close to my chest. I'm just not involved, and the committee's not involved in the MOU process. It's working in parallel, and you can be assured, as well as your representatives on the committee, but also myself, have pushed and said, look, this is actually a really important document, and in a perfect world, it might have been sequenced before we got onto the SOE, and I'm acutely aware of that, and so I'm keeping the pressure on from my end, but we're not involved in that. But it is moving with pace.
Katrina.
Thank you for the time and the effort that's gone into it. I just want to reiterate, I'm really pleased to see that the different views of the different councils in our iwi and hapu are being seriously considered in this. And in terms of number 2 and 3 column, there are some things in there that I actually quite agree with, and I think it's good that we're looking at those strategically and respectfully to see how we can come together and make sure that this is a document that will last for a long period of time and that will last for our communities and our iwi and our hapu as well. So thank you for taking your time to do that.
Sam, it might be helpful if I just say what the next step is. The next step is before the committee meets again, and then before it comes back to you, is that while I've held the pen on the version that you've got in front of you, and I've filtered all of the submissions and helpfully just taken chunks from each of the submissions, and hopefully you can see yourselves and you can see your submissions from the first time around that have been basically taken by me, and I've approved the cut and paste and the addition. But for this next round, I will be, and I haven't said this to Andy or Bernie yet, I'll be getting a small group of the committee together, and my proposal is that I borrow Sam, and that we just get a small group for us to then in detail work on the wordsmithing for it to come back to the committee. So that next step is that a small group of the committee, like Katie Sabellin, who's a great wordsmith, and Sam, to actually go through all of the submissions and then work on the words. We need to keep it as tight as we possibly can. And as I think you can see with that very first point that Sam made about it perhaps only being a year long, either that it ends after a year or that there is a firm requirement for there to be a review. This is not a constitution. This is not a contract in a sense. This is actually quite a hand-in-glove fluid document. If we're 3 months in and you identify something that we've all missed, or the board goes, look, we've agreed to this, but we're having a bit of a problem here, then we can bring it back to the committee, and we can bring it back to you for re-looking at it. It's actually quite a dynamic, evolving document. And after a year, once we've got those relationships established, it might be that the second iteration of this looks quite different. But this is the first one out of the trap, so we want to. It's probably erring on the side of being more complete than potentially what you might be familiar with statements of intent for your other CCOs. Often they'll be much more condensed, and in the future, I can imagine that we might move more to that. We're shying on the side of conservatism here, to just to make sure that we're all on the same page. But there's still a bit of, even within that second edition, there's a bit of repetition. We can still tighten it up a bit. It is, again, it's not some persuasive essay-type articulation of an argument. If it's said, my position is, if it's said once, the board's got the message. It doesn't need to necessarily be repeated every time through. And we do that a little, and the danger with that is that we just slightly change the context and give it a little bit of a different, potentially a different interpretation. And my hope would that we want to avoid that. So with the small group, I'll be looking and putting the thumb screws on ourselves to go, look, every word, does this really add value? Does this add clarity? Does this set us up for success? Or is it just verbiage that sounds nice but isn't adding a great deal of weight?
And that just reflects, Chris, doesn't it, that Central District's Water and the board, they're not starting from scratch. We have 3 councils that are operating water services pretty effectively and efficiently now, and they're picking up those all of those long-term plans and capital programs and all of that, and so we've just got to, I guess, craft this in a way that there's some clear expectation. I've spoken to the board and just out of no surprises gave them a high-level heads up with a copy of it, just for them to merely indicate. I mean, the D-Day is when we give it over to them, and they have the opportunity over a 2-week period or so to then look at it and come back with any clarifying questions or any difficulties they might have. But in anticipation of the fact that this is the second edition, I let them have a look at it. They were delighted. They were delighted with the direction. They had some questions, all of which are covered in the 8 points. They're all the same things. And they said, look, we're really comfortable about how they're very experienced directors. They've seen a lot of statement of expectations, and they thought this was a really sharp one and a really focused one. So I think that's good. We're just having the conversations that nobody feels as if they're left behind, that nobody's mana is being impinged upon, that everybody's in the conversation, and that they're being listened to, and we are being careful to manaki what is quite a complex process with a lot of players towards the 30th of June, when we want to hand this document over. Nola.
Thank you. I would just like to say that I'm happy with the way things are going on the amount of transparency and open discussion. I feel that if it doesn't go into this document, it will feed into other documents and won't get lost. But I will give one tiny little bit of feedback on page 3. Can we please have a macron on the U for Manawatu?
Oh, it must be the only one, because I went through and tried to make sure that I had all the macrons. I'm sorry about that, but thank you for.
Oh, look, thanks, Bernie, Sam, and all of you others who've been working on this. Appreciate it, and I agree with Nola. We've had, and what you said earlier, Sam, we've had early engagement. We've been over this. We've had this available to us for some time. It's always interesting when you've got 3 councils working together, but somebody just made the statement that these are 3 councils delivering well on water services, so we all pretty much know what we're doing. For me, it was understanding, does the statement of expectation reflect council priorities, the things that we value and have set a priority around, particularly around growth and our financial discipline. Does it reflect what we've asked for in terms of the long-term plan and affordability for our district partnerships with iwi and hapu, and is it a reasonable document? And so from my perspective, I feel like it's, there is some final working to be done on it, but I'm in support of it. Thank you for the work with it.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, hey, look, just quickly for me, pretty happy to probably support Joe's comments as well. For me, I think it's really important to, I'm happy with the direction of travel. I think it's important to enable the board to do their thing, and I guess it comes down to a bit of a trust model when we're obviously all at the early stages of things. But I think as we transform and move forward, then we'll build that trust, and that'll enable us to go forward as one. I guess for me, it's about enabling that continuity, especially as we probably transform through reforms and stuff like that as individual councils. So I think it's good to sort of set those foundations so we are enabling that continuity for within this piece of work, but also that board to go forward further than just probably even our tenure around this council table. So, but yeah, happy with the work, and there's obviously been a lot of heavy lifting behind the scenes, and great work.
So, hearing general support from, I guess, a handful of people. Is there anyone with any specific, general concerns, or any specific concerns that you want to raise? Mike?
Yeah, I'm obviously on record on this one before, but I mean, we've heard that the MOU is not necessarily an intrinsic part of this document, but to my thinking, nothing's changed as far as I'm concerned. No MOU, no deal.
Look, just briefly from me, I like what's been done, but importantly, how it's been done. The process has been followed, so full support.
David? Clint, look like you've got something.
In principle, support for what we've already read in draft. I'm ultimately mindful that we've just been provided this that reflects feedback, and you're going to have a small party that's going to work on refining that. Really keen for when we're excluding something based on the feedback provided by partners, we have a way that you've captured that that then feeds back through. So if you've left it out, that you're going to incorporate it into the water service delivery plan, I want to see that, yes, we've acknowledged that, and yes, this is how we plan to do it. Or if we've discounted it, fine, discount it, but provide that rationale why, just to make sure that we're closing the loop on that. So,
can I just clarify? So, are you saying if on the existing draft, if there's something that's being changed or removed, you want to know about it, or are you also talking about the feedback as well? Okay,
both, because I'm really keen that the feedback that's already been provided probably moves away from being. It looks quite verbose, but I haven't looked at the content and the quality of what it's saying. So just making sure that in the process of refining it, we don't lose what happens with it next.
Look, thanks for that feedback, Clint. I'm acutely aware of that. Even doing the second version, which is actually quite different from the first, the track changes document was unable to be read, right? So I thought that we're in such an early stage, I don't necessarily need to provide chapter and verse as to what the changes are. But my intention is for the third version. I'm hoping that we're now getting to refining. I implored the committee. I said, look, don't give me long soliloquies as to the justification of X, Y, and Z. Give me the words, right? We're now at this stage of show me the money, show me the words. and so if you've got a difficulty with a provision, actually what's most helpful is to give the words. So I acknowledge that there's some velocity there. We'll be working through with that small group, but my intention is that when you get this document back, you might actually have the old document, the new doc. We need to think about it, how I'll do it, but I want to make it as crystal clear as I can for you about what's come in and what's come out, so you don't have to then start afresh with version 3 and say, right, we've got to start at clause 1. You can actually see exactly where things have changed and perhaps the reasoning behind that as to, because if there's not a justifiable reason, then my position is we're not changing. So if it's merely because if you wrote it, you would use some different words. Thanks for the suggestion, but if it doesn't materially add to it and it's not materially important and it doesn't clarify to the board exactly what their role is, then I'll be taking that as advice and perhaps just sticking with the words we've got. So, point well made. We'll be trying to make that as clear as possible, so it's as easy for you as we can make it to identify quickly where the changes are.
And look, I just for clarity to make sure that what I've heard is what will play out. So, put the individual council and partner statement of positions between 18 and 25. Ultimately, who's going to be responsible for the rewording or wordsmithing of what those statements look like?
I think that, how do I put this? There is definitely parts of the statement that we have in there at the moment that there are elements that apply to the other two councils, and so I suspect that it will be a quite a minor refinement down to just really focus on the specific local flavour, specific local context we want to provide. So there's definitely 2 or 3 sentences that could already be removed and then apply equally across the three councils. The proposal would be that probably Bernie and I would do that in the background, and you can see that from that third column, even though we're not discussing it today, that there has been an attempt to kind of try and make it consistent across the 3. I think there's just further conversation that will be needed before the next shareholders committee workshop or meeting. But we'll be communicating with you as a table to let you know where we land, because I know that this one element is quite an important element to this table. So,
and sorry, last one. So just thinking about direction of travel, in particular to the memorandum, is the intent that will land at the same time as council is being asked to formally adopt this going?
I just simply don't have an answer for you. All I can tell you is that I've been harassing Monique and now start harassing Dan because I think it is important that we have that full document suite. It's not just the MOU, right? We've seen the shareholders agreement. We've got the water service delivery plan. We need the MOU to have that overall overview. And I've been quite clear that the MOU can't just land in for adoption. There needs to be a round of feedback and discussion, because it's expectations both ways, right? And I think it's important that if we're seeking to reflect those expectations around the relationship in a document, that there's a conversation around what the relationship looks like from both sides. And in terms of we're talking about partnership, and so being really clear about what the partnership means, looks like, feels, what it looks like. I mean, I don't even have an understanding of whether this is very high level or whether this is getting into a lot of detail, because it's a multi-party MOU, so it's Central Districts Water, the board, the 3 councils as well. And so I think there's quite a bit of water to go under the bridge there. And so, look, I just can't give you an update because I just don't have the information. I'm sorry.
I've just texted Chris Dobie to see if he can give us an ETA and with the intention of it coming back here. I'm not sure if he's in a meeting. He's not here. Hopefully by the time he finishes, I might be able to give you an update.
Any final thoughts, comments, views, complaints, compliments, questions? No? And this is a bit unusual because this is a workshop for this council table, but we've got Andy and also Hayden who are on the shareholders committee, and I just wanted to, if you want to have a minute to do an overview of where you think things, I think it would be useful to table to hear.
Thank you very much. Thank you, first of all, for allowing me to be an observer within your council. And I acknowledge absolutely that Hayden has attended virtually all of these meetings across 3 entities. So I thank him as well. It has been a very collegial type process, and we are all on very similar pages here. Yes, there is some need to be concise, and there is a need to be some wordsmithing that goes with that, because in terms of process, once we've got to that stage, it also sits in front of the board, and they will say exactly what do you mean by this, and we need to have very clear definitions around some of those statements. So hence the need to make sure that there's minimal repetition, and if there is repetition, that it is giving exactly the same message. So that process then comes back, and ultimately it gets signed off by each individual council, because it is your statement of expectations and so on. So it's been a very, very thorough process. I think the amount of time that Chris has put into this, I think the time for the people like yourself, Sam and Katie, Dave, etc., but also the enormous amount of staff time that's gone to get us to this stage. You know, the chief executives in particular have spent hundreds of hours and many, many meetings trying to understand where all this fits together. So the short version is I'm very comfortable with it. And I think there is a general acceptance that there needs to be some brief and concise section from each individual council, even though it will be dealt with, and I acknowledge Chris Levin saying, hey, it will be in the transfer documents, it will be dealt with there, it will be dealt with chartered and so on. But there seems to be a universal decision that there should be those distinct paragraphs between the 4 entities in here, including Ngāti Waiaha. So, I just thank your council. I think it's been a fantastic process.
Thanks, Andy. Hey, do you want to? Oh, you took this. Sorry.
Kia ora. Ngā mihi nui ki a tātou, o tinoa te koro matua, te mana nui. Tairau atu ki a koe te tiamana e Mike, ki a koe te kaiwhakahaere Sam, mihi nui ki a koutou. Huri taku reo ki ngā huatanga o mate, o tinoa a rātou ki a rātou, a tātou ki a tātou, tēnā tātou. Just acknowledging everybody and their contribution for today's discussion. We've come with a watching brief for fear of opening my mouth and proving to everyone I am an idiot. Where I just want to acknowledge all of our Ngāti Raukawa Hapu and Marae leadership who have come today, because this is a really important discussion for all of our Marae Hapu and communities across our district and region. I think we're really lucky to have Chris and his leadership and the contribution he's making behind the scenes. All of our CEs, our other Chris, who's heading the organisation, and finally I think it's worth acknowledging Danielle Harris and Marge Ahini, who have made a significant contribution to this workspace. I have taken interest in all these forums, so I attended every single council workshop, and I think it's been a great process, really collaborative, open, and inclusive, which gives us some promise moving into the finalisation of this. Some key concerns or areas of focus have been around affordability and harmonisation, and I think as we're building this statement of expectation, my only caution is we just reflect on our own performance and how well or not well we've actually delivered our water services across these regions, and the current state and well-being of Punahou, of the Manawatu River, are very important. So I just caution us building a statement of expectation that's over prescriptive, and then a future entity we're holding them to an expectation that ourselves could never meet. So I think that's my only caution in listening, but otherwise it's been a really great process. So tēnā tātou.
Thanks, Hayden. Really appreciate that. You obviously heard from some of the partners around the table that there seems to be, I guess, a positive and really collaborative approach to this. This is your final opportunity based on the draft in your pre-readings. Any other concerns, questions? Otherwise, we will wrap it up. I'll pass over to Mayor Bernie. Actually, I'll pass over to Dan and Chris, and then back to Mayor Bernie. Is there any final comments from you, Dan? Chris, you got any final comments?
Chris Dybeg's just got back to me. He said it's in the stage of still being negotiated. He said he doesn't have a set ETA, but the intention is that it comes back to the councils because you'll be signatories to it. So it'll have to come back to you for your consideration and approval. So you will get line of sight to that.
Can I just test that? Is it still being negotiated? Between who, though? Because if we're a party to it.
So, Ngā Tapuai Aho, my understanding is that the chief executives are involved in some of that discussion, but it's through, and Simpson Grease and the lawyers who are doing a lot of the pen to paper on that document, plus the establishment structure of the organisation, and of course to then come back for your input. I think it would be probably unwieldy for a document of that nature to be then collectively negotiated by three councils with the councillors, but we'll come back with explanations and discussion as to we think we've got an agreement on this form and this structure. What's your input and feedback on that?
Yeah, no, happy to offline and talk to you, Dan. Yeah, Bernie, any final comments?
Thanks, Sam. Look, I just firstly want to acknowledge the Te Tūmata Kahoki membership for being here today, and Hayden, thank you for those words, and it's great to see your commitment and involvement in the process. It's been really encouraging, which I think reflects the partnership that we have. We have always from day one had a strong partnership with not only our iwi partners but also our other councils, and that's reflected in the generally collaborative and inclusive way that we have gone about this process. I do want to acknowledge Chris for his guidance and assistance through this. For an independent member who has no local government experience as such, to be as heavily involved in taking on some of the commitment that he has done, it's certainly set our direction much clearer for us. Also want to acknowledge the work that's gone on behind the scenes with our management and teams, and I know Justine has done a lot of work. Thank you, Justine, and Dan and others in the other councils as well. But also I want to acknowledge my colleagues on the shareholding committee for the work that they have done in approaching this, and the work that Sam has done, especially in terms of bringing all this together and making it a heck of a lot. Your endorsement of that work today is clearly a signal that the work that's gone on is really good. So thank you all.
Thanks.
Cheers.
We're finished on time for once.
Thank you all for all the hard work, and there's been heaps of it. So this kind of brings to a close this part of our workshop, and you've got about 30 seconds if you want a quick break to get a cup of tea before we start with strategic recreation CAPEX spending.
Okay, thank you folks for reforming for our next workshop. And now we've got strategic recreational CAPEX spending 25-26, and I'll hand over to Brent and Lacey to lead off. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, and thank you. I just want to clarify that this is for 26-27. I may have maybe put the wrong date on that. But today's workshop is really about setting the direction for how Council wants to approach the strategic parks development CAPEX funding moving forward. This workshop is not about making final decisions on individual projects today, but about understanding how councillors want to be involved in prioritisation and decision making. Last year we worked alongside Visitor Solutions, as many of you around the table were a part of, to help develop the strategic recreation investment framework to give us a more consistent and evidence-based way of assessing recreation investment opportunities. We now have the dashboard of potential projects and opportunities across the district, but the challenge is understanding how we prioritise within the available funding envelope. So through today's discussion, I am seeking guidance on what information councillors need to feel confident making future investment decisions and what role councillors want to play in the prioritisation. And the discussion today will help me refine the process and then potentially come back to you for next steps and decisions. We're kind of sticking to this part of the pyramid, so I'll do a brief background on what we've done so far and where we're at, and then if we can kind of get to what you might need from me to spend the money or potentially not. I also just want to highlight that today's workshop directly supports all three of Council's priorities. Obviously, when you consider how we ensure that our recreational and sports spaces are future fit, how they are able to accommodate growth and deliver in a financially sustainable way for our community. And at the end of this presentation, I'll come back to these questions where I'll be asking, do you still want to spend this money? And what level of involvement do you want to have? And what information do you think is most important when prioritising? And then how do you want to use the tool that we've already come up with in the future? But just to kind of go back to give a bit of a background, particularly for those who weren't here when we were working alongside Visitor Solutions. Over the past several long-term plans, we've had this forecasted line, which starts next financial year, 26-27, for investment in our sports grounds. As you can see, next year it's $1.23 million for strategic parks and reserve development, and this just incrementally increases over the following years, and it goes past year 10 as well. I want to note that this is not the only available funding for sports and recreation. We obviously still have our renewals program, and there are some specific projects that have their own budget lines in the long-term plan, which is the committed line you asked about, Nola. But I will speak more to that shortly. This funding is intended to respond to growth, changing community demand and future recreation needs across the district. What has become increasingly clear is that the number of potential projects and aspirations exceeds the amount of funding that we have. As a result, Council needs a clear and consistent way to prioritise investment decisions, and we'll go through the next slide around the process that we developed through the framework and how we evaluate projects to support the future decision making. I think the key point is that Council has already set aside funding for the purpose of strategic parks development, particularly around growth. And we now have the framework and the dashboard. We just kind of need to know from you how you would like us to use these tools and bring future advice and recommendations back to you.
Lacey,
yes,
can I just provide some context on that last slide?
Absolutely.
Because I was here when the reason we have that line of strategic parks development was that back in, I think it was 2021, 2022, there was conversation about a Donnelly Park master plan, and there was a big chunk of money that was going to be in one particular year, but we didn't know if we wanted to commit to that particular one and only project. And so the thinking was that we would spread the cost, well, the equivalent cost and a bit more over the full 20 years of the long-term plan, so that it could also be there, signalled and could be factored into the calculation of development contributions, so that we are funding the recreational stuff that we need to build because of growth. And so it was an important part. It's not just about spending money, but it was also about collecting money through the development contributions as a placeholder.
Great context. And then further to that, at the last long-term plan, it was through those conversations that councillors decided the framework would be helpful in order to make the decisions on how this money would be invested.
Can I ask a question, but tell me to park it if it needs to be? It is a financial question, so would you rather I park it or I ask it now?
Is it specifically to do with the dashboard?
I just need in my head, because coming in as a newbie, to understand that CAPEX is loan based, not ratepayer based, and therefore if you spend in year 3 1.2 million, you then have interest on that in year 4, and then at the end of year 4 you have 2.5 million plus interest, and it goes up like that. And so I realise I'm dropping you in it, so if you want to park it, feel free to park it, but I would like that clarification.
We'll clarify that, but I think it is loan funded, and the interest, I think so we'll get some finance advice to give.
And I realise that that's a financial question, so I have a question that says, if we say, look, we just don't want to carry on with this, we don't think our district can afford it, does that trigger significance because these are long-term plan decisions?
Great question. I'll clarify that too.
I'll clarify that by saying I think that investment in upgrades and investment for growth is important, but I also want to clarify that I've got a strong interest in us maintaining what we've got and keeping our current assets in really good condition and being realistic in future fit sort of environment, that we're not, committing ourselves to expenditure that's going to become problematic in a rates capping environment. So I think this is a time where we have to look, and these are the tough decisions.
We'll just quickly touch on some of that. This CAPEX line isn't intended for renewals or anything like that. We do have separate renewals lines for our sports grounds and reserves. This is for growth and new assets, I suppose, or further development within a current asset. But we can talk further about that. In terms of the framework itself and the process and how it's used and how they move from an idea through to potentially being built. Projects can come from a range of sources. However, at this point in terms of the dashboard, the vast majority of those were created through the needs analysis work that Visitor Solutions did. So at the same time as creating the framework, we asked them to do a needs analysis across the district, where they not only had a look at the capacity of what we currently have, but they worked alongside our growth, alongside Lauren Baddock, and looked at our growth projections, as well as interviewing a number of our sports groups across the district, and developed a number of key needs across Horowhenua which is the vast majority of the projects on that dashboard. However, afterwards, I then went and held a number of workshops, not only here in Levin, but in Shannon and Foxton, and then since that time have also spoken to a number of user groups, and so have constantly been talking to them about the framework, particularly the assessment criteria, and so there are a couple more on there towards the bottom, which have come out from actually the Shannon Community Plan, as well as a specific sports club. And so the intention is that all projects are assessed through this framework, through the assessment criteria, rather than coming to us independently or on an ad hoc basis or through a random annual plan submission that you might receive. And then the framework helps us provide more consistent and transparent way on how we evaluate projects and understands the alignment and competing priorities. The projects are then captured in the dashboard, as you've seen. These are actually presented through to you in the OPR. It's only come through to an OPR once so far. I think that was earlier this year. They will be in the next OPR as well. So that there is a live record and you have visibility of project readiness and I guess what the community is talking to us about. And then ultimately investment decisions will still come back through to you, but hopefully this provides a clearer rationale and strong evidence base for the decision making.
I think it's important to clarify too, as part of the framework, it determines council's role. So just because a project's on there doesn't necessarily mean that it's to be funded 100% by council. You know, council's got various roles they play, whether it's partner or like support, or enable. So this doesn't necessarily, just because it's on the dashboard, mean that we're going to be funding that.
So what you're telling me is on this dashboard that we've committed 1.3 million.
Can I get you to hold that question? I'll just quickly talk through the assessment criteria and then I'll go through each of the columns of the dashboard and then, yeah, cool. So these are the assessment criteria that the community know about, and we went through an interesting kind of workshop with councillors on how to weight these, and it's gone through a really technical Excel spreadsheet, and it spits out a number at the end once we kind of do a 1 to 5 on each of these criteria with the specific projects that might come through to us from a community group or identified in the needs analysis. And so here's the dashboard, which you have in front of you. And so I just wanted to go through the different columns so that we can, hopefully there's clearer idea of what you're looking at. So the site and area is pretty obvious. It's the location of where the project is. In terms of the project itself, that is a really quick snapshot of, I guess, what we've identified is the need. However, I do there are some kind of nuances in the wording. For example, Project 2, which says increased floodlit provision, that does not mean more floodlights, as we have discussed quite a lot here. It actually means improving the turf, so that the floodlights that we currently have there can be used for longer hours. So it's, yeah. So there are some nuances within how they are described. Stage of the process, you will see, is quite varied. So not all of these projects are ready to be built come July this year. A lot of them actually we still need to do some further assessment or working with the community to create a proof of viability. These tends to be the ones that have greater costs. We don't have an understanding of what the costs associated with doing this work are yet. And then there's somewhere we need to get a design, and we have the one which is complete. As you can see, that was the decision that council made to extend the baseball backstop netting at Western Park.
The score is the score that the project got through the impact assessment using the assessment criteria, and depending on what that score is, they then get the red high, medium, or low. Next is the network criticality. So while some might score kind of medium, actually, in terms of being able to meet future growth needs, or projected growth needs, they might have a higher network criticality. So that's why there's the difference between some of those where there's a medium and a higher than the next one. And that the role in the following column is, as Brent described, not always is it council's role to own and operate all of these projects. Some of them we can partner with others, some we might be just providing the land, or working with a group to kind of enable it to happen. One that you can't see on the screen there, but I can see in front of me, is a project that we added in just last week, which was the Shannon Community Plan project, where it's a partnership with Sport Manawatu for the grassroots funding. As you can see, most of them we don't have an idea at this stage of how much money is needed to complete the project. The committed part, Nola, is projects that have separate line item in the long-term plan. So it doesn't necessarily rely on this specific CAPEX line item. So, for example, the Eastern Park roof replacement of the grandstand, we do have 383 in next year's budget available for that, additional to what is the 1.28. It's addition. No, we don't know that's what it's going to cost.
It's a placeholder in the long-term plan. Yes. It's a specific line item.
Yes, that's the same with the grandstands in Shannon and Levin. Those separate line items were added in a couple of long-term plan cycles ago, so we don't know the costs of those at this stage, and they are for, I want to say, like 29 years, 29-30.
I was just going to say, have those earthquake strengthening ones been reassessed post the decision around the notices being, the changes to the earthquake prone?
Not at this point, no. That would have been the figures that were put in the LTP 2 cycles ago.
But the actual categorisation, so the rest of the table, sort of putting aside the dollar amount, the actual assessment, has it been done post?
No, so change? This was done, I want to say, September, August last year? 25. Yeah, so no.
The last question from me before we get into the detail is, can you remind me, does the framework have a trigger for when a business case is required? Because obviously we've got a stage there, proof of viability. It's kind of proof of viability and need, and then presumably if there's support to progress with something, there'll be a financial trigger where we go, we need to do a business case light, or no business case light, or business case major, like an aquatic centre. Is that,
We haven't ironed out those details yet. So hopefully at the end of this, we can kind of get some idea of how we might be able to progress some of those things. This is evolving as this is kind of the first, coming up to the first year where we have more investment available to help with these decisions. And so, the last thing on the when is at the date when we assessed it, when we thought the project would be needed in terms of for the growth of the sport itself, or when we thought that the site might need to be renewed or developed further. And so yes, I'm happy to come back to that, but just to go over again the questions that I'm hoping we can answer today is what kind of involvement. Oh, I forgot the top one. The first initial question was something like, do you still want to spend this money? And then what kind of involvement do you want to have in this process? What further information do you think would be important to help prioritise, and how do you want to use this tool in the future? So hopefully through that we can answer the question around, triggering potential need for a business case or something. Happy to take questions at this point.
I don't know how I jumped in front of you, Katrina, but
You go. Oh. Do you want to?
I want to go back, just a quick question, because not having seen the assessment report, just to quickly ask, was previous investment in an area taken into consideration for that score? Because I'm just trying to think of balance and equity for rural towns versus, and I will use the example of Eastern Park has had upgrades to their lighting, given further investment versus a cost against Shannon having their work done. So it's about making sure that there's equity for the smaller parks and towns. Was that taken into consideration?
I'm going to have the first crack at answering this, and then I'll ask my boss to fill in any gaps. In short, no. The assessment criteria looked at the needs for the district as a whole, and then also considered whether there would be, a high volume of participation, generational participation as a result of this project, whether it would improve the economy. But I think one of the other considerations within there is, I'm trying to think which one it comes under, it might be suitability, was actually around the ability for communities to get to a certain location. So when I'm thinking about your question, one of the considerations we might be thinking of is, does this, if we put more investment into this particular site, is other people going to be able to come to this location with the current transport options that we have or not, and therefore is the investment better served elsewhere because those people who can't travel need to. So that's how we would consider it in that kind of context.
I think just to quickly add, the framework is project by project, like Lacey's alluded to, and with all the criteria. But at the end of the day, it produces a prioritised list of all the projects that we put through here. And depending on the level of involvement from elected members, then it's essentially hopefully provide some evidence, some need, and some robustness, I guess, around decision making and where we decide to invest in the future. Like I say, it's live. It should, so an LTP plan where we might have a number of community groups coming with different projects and different things. We can put this in here and then see where it lands and where that stage of the program to help inform future decisions.
Thank you so much. Can we just go back to that when you're asking us the questions, that page of questions? Thank you. So I think mine is related to number 2, and you've just answered a couple of them in terms of, I'm being a new member, I'm quite interested in how you determine the scores and the assessment criteria. So from a governance perspective, high level, my interest is very strongly in how, as you just talked to, in terms of the evidence need and the robustness that you're using, I'd really like to see evidence in terms of social equity and health outcomes, and inclusivity and accessibility when we're looking at those different projects, and that co-benefit is really important for me, for our community, in terms of its mental and its physical, etc. So that would be something, as an elected member, I'd be really interested in, is how do we make those decisions, because we're financially strained and there's a lot of need. That would be very important to me. What is the score? How do we come up with that? And are we including those demographics? Are we including equity? Are we including inclusivity? So the evidence, for me, I'd like to be involved in looking at what is the evidence.
So we can absolutely share with you the further breakdown of the assessment criteria. There's bullet points for each of these, and then kind of a 1 to 5 rating. When we put it into the spreadsheet, which spits out that final number, I can share with you that spreadsheet that we currently have, so you can see where the scores sit and how it's being valued on that. So we can share that easily.
And just to add some additional context for those that weren't at the table at the time, we workshopped this with elected members around the criteria, around the weighting. So it's the governance table has had some input into how the framework is shaped.
Yeah, so acknowledge the work of previous councils and don't want to kind of redo that, because I know that a lot of thought would have gone into this. Just feedback from me. I know that you've rated them there in the document where they meet the high threshold, so that the projects that are high sit at the top of the list. But for me, it would be useful to see each area together. So all of the Donnelly Park work, because then as a councillor, I look to think, what are the economies of scale? If we're going to do this, why don't we do that? Even though it might be only a low priority, but would we get really good bang for buck for the district if they were all, if there was a commitment? So that's just the way I see it. And just would be really interested to know, in terms of those figures that have been committed, are they committed a wee way out? Because we're not rating for those at the moment or in the next year, aren't we? Or are they? So the earthquake strengthening was reconsidered. And I just want to say that these public places are the things that have high visibility, high impact, and therefore as councillors we get high feedback, high commentary. I'd really like to know what's going on. I'd like to know how it's committed, why it's committed, when the money's spent. That's really important to me, and those decisions probably are very visible to council, even if we aren't having to make a voting decision on them. I think it's really critical, and I'll go back to the conversations that we had about the Foxton Beach foreshore by the Te Whārangi Surf Club building and the work that was being talked about for there. Those are, and council said we want to know more about that, because that stuff becomes the stuff that we hear about and we need to be over in order to, I think, either champion or support or whatever. So that's my feedback. Thank you, and thank you for the previous work that was done.
Building, thank you on what Joe had said, going the other way and adding to your workload, I don't mean to, is when I look at the scores, and I'm a number person if you haven't already worked it out, they're not down in descending order of priority for the score. The top score is 69, the next one is 70. So just thoughts and comments on the two that score the highest of Playford Park and the expanding the aquatic provisions are the two highest scoring, which tends to imply they're the highest need, if I'm reading this correct. So therefore, are you looking from direction from us that this is where we'd like, if we were wanting to spend the money, this is where we'd want to put our focus?
Good question. I know we have a version where the score is descending. So I will find where that is and send that through to you. But yes, ideally, I would like to be able to leave this this morning and understand where you would like me to spend energy in terms of either further exploring certain projects or what further information you might need in terms of making a decision on investment. Does that answer that question, Councillor Fox? Excellent. And also, I've got up the long-term plan in answer to your question, Councillor Mason. It's in for both the Levin Domain Grandstand and Shannon Domain Grandstand. At this stage is in 29-30 year. That committed funding.
On the dashboard there, you can see this. So when it was done, it was 7+ years. So that's an indication when the project. Just quickly on those, on the likes of the earthquake strengthening stuff, is that now 2037? That stuff's got to be done under the new regime. Yeah, to be fair, if we're talking around those two projects in particular, other than them being put in the LTP, we probably haven't done much work at this stage on and understanding. So there's probably more work to do, and whether that pushes it out or not, or understanding what exactly is required. This was done obviously with like I said, I'm more just talking generally. I think that was when the new regulation had pushed it out to 2037. So at least it allows for these two projects, but also a whole lot of other work too.
Yeah, so I was going to ask the same question in terms of the earthquake strengthening works. Can we treat them as a separate work stream to actually assess were they timed in the current long-term plan based on compliance with the strengthening requirements, or is it a property maintenance cycle that was asset management plan that was otherwise informing that? On the Domain Grandstand, I would be really keen for that project to be linked in with the town centre, because I think that there's such an opportunity there that it needs to have kind of some special treatment, let's put it that way, in terms of what it looks and feels like. And I'd be pretty keen for us to look at it through the lens of if we were doing something to a grandstand, what else are we doing? Like, what's the opportunity for provision of additional public space or commercial / retail / hospo type provision? What's the potential for ground leases and all that kind of stuff? Like, so I'm sorry, that's like getting bigger than Ben Hur, but I think that is a big opportunity, and I wouldn't want us to be constrained by looking at it as a purely a replacement or a strengthening exercise. Just on that, I'll just jump in quickly too. I think like when you look at the Shannon Community Plan, obviously that was the same sort of conversation that was had around the grandstand. So, is it still future fit when you look at what we could need, what would need maybe as a community space? So, if we were to do this work in time, what else? Yeah, again, could we be doing as a community to enable something else? Is it a gym? Is it a community space as well? So, just for bring that to the front of mind too.
So I'd support that totally, in the fact that looking at the lovely video we saw first thing this morning, and we saw some graphic possibilities over at Te Takari, I would definitely think that if you went back and did a reassessment of that score with a slightly different focus, it actually might come up quite significantly from the opportunity point of view. And that's where my questions are coming from, is making sure we don't miss out on opportunities because we're too focused on what we want to try and not spend.
I think what I'm hearing here is that the grandstands themselves are conversations that we can be having in terms of the long-term plan conversation that we, will be having over the next year. and so we can absolutely tie in all of these considerations within this. I'm just trying to ascertain why the when is different. So the long-term plan 2930 was to do with the legislation. That's why we put it in the long-term plan at that stage. My best guess as for why we've said 7+ years is because actually we could have, in terms of what the building itself is providing, could potentially get 7+ years out of it. However, I do want to put a wee disclaimer in there, because we have known that there will be a future decision on those two assets. We have done very minimal maintenance of them, because why paint a new grandstand if we are going to do something different with it in a couple of years' time? So I do just want to preface that. But I feel like we're going into the detail of some of these projects. But we will. I just wanted to confirm that we will have a further conversation about these particular line items when it comes to the long-term plan, because there will be conversations that come up there. Just going back to the questions, I understand that the question that's not on there does need an answer around does this trigger the significance and engagement policy if we do not spend this money the next financial year. So, but I'll come back to you in answering that. In terms of next steps, do you have an idea at this stage on how you want to be involved?
Given this is a priority list, wouldn't we just prioritise them and say to you, go ahead and just smash out the first 5 because it's a priority? You know what I mean? Like, we've sort of got this list, but we're just sitting here talking about it forever. If it's a priority list, it's a priority list, and we just go ahead and do what's the priority and kind of make that happen. I know there's financial considerations and all that, but ultimately, if that can't be done, we just go to the next line item and the next line item. That's the way I would look at it. Otherwise, it's not a priority list. It's just a wish list.
This is where it starts to get a little bit complicated. So, to Joe's point, you need to look at these projects as how they interconnect, not as individual projects. So, when you look at that in the context, the number that relate to Donnelly Park inside the top 10, they're all interconnected. So, investment in one area potentially has a flow onto another project. So, you really need to be having a look at how do these flow into each other. We've also got to acknowledge that we've got to take the same view of this that we take with our infrastructure, right? Sports fields is infrastructure, it's community infrastructure, and it requires a level of investment. Some of it we do by renewal, some of it we do by appropriate CAPEX spend. In the drip feed of $1.2 million for the next 20 years, that's not going to cut it. So otherwise what you will actually end up doing is delivering ad hoc projects that talk to one part of our community and not necessarily the other. And I think that there's an opportunity here for, what's Monique's term, double-digit outcomes. It's not quite that, but double duty outcomes, that's it, here by choosing to invest. I think the framework gives us where we can be a little bit more intentional and can absolutely give a little bit more resonance to the importance of stuff. But in terms of how do these interconnect and come together, that is the piece come long-term plan time that I think you need to look at these as a whole to look at what is the return on investment if we address these 3 parts of the project together inside those long-term plan years. Because then there's number 4, which I kind of want a little bit more information on around what
is coming around long-term plan in relation to expanded aquatic provision for Levin Central South Catchment. So we've had this conversation. We know there's a significant need for additional aquatics, particularly in Levin South. What's that going to look like? And what's the plan for bringing that to LTP? Because it's potentially going to be a sort of scenario in there versus a combination of projects that are being delivered over time.
Yeah, and that's where my previous point comes into play in terms of when we're looking at it from a strategic high-level viewpoint. I really want to know if we've decided we are prioritising these particular projects, who's going to benefit, how many will benefit, how does it feed into the wider community, and just checklisting all of those requirements so that when we go back to the community, I can say, yep, this is why, this is the rationale, this is who, and this is how many will benefit.
My welcoming of this piece of work around the framework was that to a large extent it took the politics out of decision making. It was very much driven by criteria, and the criteria and the weighting given to each aspect of those criteria was really robust, and we ended up spitting out a number and therefore spitting out good decision making. But I've heard things today which are very valid points around interconnecting, about multiple bangs for your buck if you bring things together and so on. My dream is still that we can massage that into the criteria, that the piece of work we end up with will not be when we get to the long-term plan, let's look at this project and that project specifically, but for these reasons, but that the criteria is expanded to include things like opportunity cost, like the way that projects interlink together, 1 + 1 = 3. In other words, it's about trying still, with respect to politicians like myself, keeping the politics out of politics so that we make really good, robust decisions based on criteria which is now much broader and more inclusive. So those are my thoughts generally, but what I don't want to see is everything that's good about this framework then turning into a piece of, I want this for that area and you want that for that area.
Sorry, just to address one of your points there. I think there is the ability to integrate that into the assessment criteria. There is one around suitability there, which looks at, the site being the best place for it and things like that. But I think within that decision making, we could also add in a point in there around, does this connect with other projects, and therefore does it make sense to do it at the same time? Yeah. Any other questions, points that you want me to consider at this stage?
Oh, sure. Kia ora. Thank you. And it's hard to rationalise this with our criteria that we had way back when. But we had nothing. We've now got this, which is amazing. Does it answer all our questions? Probably not. But we have somewhere to start with, and we have to be okay with that for now. But definitely the connectivity of different venues, the proof of viability, like for me, I'm like, what does that mean? Over what period? If we're assessing a site for its use, over what period are we utilising it? As someone that stands under a lot of these structures when I'm at sports, so for Shannon, for your grandstand would be amazing to stand there and not get wet, even if you're under the grandstand. Total for that happening for Shannon. And also looking at the use of the pūtea. So obviously I agree with that because I like being at sports events. But understanding that when we agree to utilise money in a certain area, how does that translate to the use of that area? Previously, I know we've spent pūtea on certain things and we still can't use that space. So I'm like, well, why? So just, and I get that's not on Kaimahi, that's not for you guys to decide, that's something that we as councillors, when we make our decision about where we're spending the money, but just having that understanding of, okay, if we put this up, does that mean it's an increased use of that space? Or if there isn't, what else do we have to do to ensure that to happen, to make sure that we're investing our ratepayers' money, all loan funded, in the right place? But yeah, I'm really interested in this stuff. And yeah, so kia ora. Kia ora. Yes, just support tautoko those who have talked about the Shannon grandstand. Very proud of that grandstand. It's old and it's been there for a long time. But its purpose, needs upgrading. So we still have whānau children that go in there, teams that go underneath, wondering is this going to be the day where it collapses because of the earthquake-prone building. So a lot of that is by chance. People use it, and it shouldn't be like that. So also that area, so the Shannon Domain is one of our high priority community hubs. I guess we have all of our events there. Shannon Christmas Carnival, all of these amazing events, the car show. But when we do have people come from all over the country, especially for the car show, we can't actually cater for them in terms of the wharepaku. Those need upgrading, by the way. The wharepaku, the whole area. We have to utilise the garage across the road who sometimes says, no, you can't use this. So I think investing in the Shannon community, and I'm always hearing this back from our people, our whānau, the community, we always get missed out and pay rates and pay more rates sometimes than other towns. So I just wanted to view that, share those views. And well done for this tool, this assessment tool or criteria that we are able to, like listening to Nina, didn't have that before. It gives you something to work by, a framework to work by. And one last question, the last item on this list here, Shannon Domain, the installation of gym equipment, when it's got 1 to 3 years here, how long is it going to be this year? Or what's the time frame for having that?
So that was a project that actually came out of the Shannon Community Plan. And then at the same time, we were approached by Sport Manawatu, who had identified a fund that they wanted to spend in Shannon. So this is a potential investment opportunity where it would be 50-50 with Sport Manawatu, because they have approximately $50,000 for this particular project, and looking at it, thought that exercise equipment at the Shannon Domain fit within the criteria for this particular fund. So put it through the assessment criteria, and that's how it ended up on here. So what? Oh, sorry.
One final question. And this might be overcooking it, and I wonder if Councillor Grimstone, through his education Horowhenua hat, whether we could facilitate a session with the school board of trustee chairs and principals to kind of get an overview of this and also understand what they're happening in their property space, because like I know schools are investing, like for example there's a primary school that's just invested in a covered court just now, and so it'd be quite useful to have an information flow both ways And I know that the government's changed how they're doing how schools are making property decisions, and so it might be useful just to connect into that space. I don't know. I don't know if that's any value in that. Maybe even as part of a pre-consultation, as part of the LTP, that if we get them across this and we get some information from them, I don't know if that's a good idea or not.
I can, absolutely look into that. Just as an FYI, we did have the principal of Shannon come along to our workshop, which we had held in Shannon, and we've continued to have the colleges involved, and they're part of our user groups as well, so that they're well across the but not everyone.
And I just add to that, as part of like facility life cycle planning, if we're building a facility, a significant one, would go through the feasibility study business case, like you've sort of alluded to. That would also, in the feasibility stage, look at what other offerings are and sort of have another opportunity to link in with, like the classic was if we're doing an aquatic centre, look at Horowhenua College and the condition of their asset, and if there's an opportunity to look at a joint or,
just like to say, support Sam's, Councillor Jennings' points. We should always be working with our schools. In a smaller user group, I do work with the sports coordinators, whether it's Pehu or Horowhenua, and it's so important because they give you so much information of what's actually happening on the ground, what kids are actually playing. It'll be so useful just to have that collaboration of, if you're planning for our future, this is the trend and we're already seeing it, where we're actually going to invest. Also wanted to thank you for your assessment rankings. They were so good. Having been on most of those grounds, they were very, very accurate in terms of need. Loved it, especially in terms of importance as well. One of my worries was making sure that the smaller communities were fairly considered and just avoid over-investing in the same hubs. But Councillor Grimson was very right. If we can make savings by being strategic in our investment, I think that will ease some of the concerns.
Thank you. I'm mindful of time. Did you want to?
I just going to do a roundup, see if any other thoughts, questions, queries, reactions. No, in which case, that's in which case another very high quality piece of work. Thank you both. Love the detail. So we're going to. Do you want any closing comments you'd like to make at all?
The only thing is, I heard a number of things that I will go and talk to colleagues about to get some information through to you ASAP. But then I know that there's a really strong interest in this mahi, so what I think the best next steps would be is to kind of identify those top projects, including where there is interconnectedness, and kind of come back to you with some options or recommendations on where we think we should go to next.
Great, thanks. So we're actually surprisingly running pretty close to time, and I'm sure it's not down to me, but I'll take the credit for it. So we've now got Councillor Oni time, and I think, is that going to be a working lunch?
Yeah, look, we'll move into the ante room, and so lunch is probably booked for. It's out there already, so we'll have a working lunch for. Dan will be joining us, and we're due back here 1:30.